Hello. Welcome
Hello.
to Within Orb.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here, Jen. I'm like so excited to have this awesome conversation with you about books. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time to be here today. And this is Camm Cassidy, someone who
Yes.
actually you came by Kaylee, the Celestial Arts Education Library, earlier this past winter to come check out the books. And so we began our conversation. And now I would love to learn where you got started with your journey in astrology books. What was your first astrology book?
Yeah, so looking back, when you emailed me with these questions, there were kind of like two that first came to me. One was sort of like definitely sticks out in my mind as the first book that led me into all of this. But it's sort of quasi-astrological. It's called The Little Book of Coincidence by John Martineau, and I don't have the cover, that does cover for it anymore. But it's basically in these series of really small books that have like these bite-sized introductions to different things in like sacred geometry and like this page right here. This is the pentagram of Venus. This book basically is just all about these different geometrical principles and planetary cycles. And I remember having this maybe when I was like 10 or 11 or so, and just initially brought my mind to be really curious about yeah, what was with all this like seemingly programmed things in the sky? Because I was already really interested in math and things like the Fibonacci sequence had intrigued me, and this book shows how that shows up in our solar system in a bunch of different ways. And then so right around the same time, my elder sister, who's 8 years older than me, was also getting interested in astrology. And so she had this book, Star Power by Vanessa Montgomery, which is, it's a small, short, it's what you need to just pop right into reading charts. It gives you all the basics. And this was, I remember, the first book I really read that, yeah, got me interested in like, wow, Saturn, Aquarius, just like actually putting the pieces together. So,
You
yeah.
got interested first in Saturn.
Well,
I think
I
it's
don't,
funny that
maybe.
you're bringing Saturn up, like, yeah, Saturn. Like, wait a minute. People don't normally get excited about Saturn from Jump Street.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I can't say I remember exactly if there was a planet. Although I will say, when I was even younger, like age 8, 9, going through my nodal reversal, interesting enough, I was really interested in eclipses and eclipse cycles. And I remember being on like these old NASA.gov websites, like printing off tables of eclipses. And like I had asked my parents for years, like I really wanted to go see an eclipse. And so yeah, I was sort of just naturally drawn to a lot of these things from a younger age.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the wooden book series that has that little book of coincidences. The picture you just showed of the page of the Venus star pattern, the
Mm.
producers of that series turned it into a poster that's hanging here in the building.
Oh,
So
no way.
yeah,
I didn't
it's
even
really
know that.
cool. And they bring up the Fibonacci sequence. So can you say more about that? Like when you were seeing the little book of coincidences, did you start to see that everywhere? I mean, how was that for you as a small person?
Well, I remember it was in third grade actually. We all like everyone in my class did like a little independent presentation, and I chose to do mine on the Fibonacci sequence. So I was doing like putting this little, poster board together with pictures of like hurricane spirals and the Milky Way galaxy and pine cones and sunflowers and how it shows up everywhere. And so I was already looking into that. And then yeah, I mean this book here just talks about how that same ratio that seems to be programming our reality in the sense of um how mathematical beauty is really proportioned out in that way. And it's just so perfect that the sun and Venus cycle from our perspective share that same ratio, that just kind of programs, yeah, our everything that has to do with beauty and organizational harmony. And yeah, it was just like, wow, that's something there. So
Yeah,
yeah,
what an awesome foundation to start with. Okay, so here's the big question. If you were
yeah.
stranded, maybe on a desert island, maybe in an airport. No, I'm kidding. If you were, well, oh, we could put you on a mountain. If you were stranded on a mountain in the
Okay.
middle of Mongolia in the Altai
Okay.
Mountains,
Yes.
what three astrological books, I know it's hard, would you
Yeah.
have by your side?
Yeah, I know this is like the dreaded question to book nerds, astrology nerds. But so the first book that I am deciding to bring with me here is going to be the Arcana Dictionary of Astrology from Fred Gettings. And I picked this book because it's actually really thick for being like small. Like the pages are really thin. It's almost 600 pages. And every time I open this book up, I read about something I've literally never heard about. This man put together such a comprehensive text. There's everything in here from fixed stars to lunar mansions to medical astrology to cosmobiology and everything in between. It just covers everything, and I just feel like if like even for posterity, like I don't know if I'm like the supposed to be like the last person on the earth, but like this is like our modern like definitions and foundations of like these ancient Hellenistic authors, right? Where we have like kind of just this bulleted, enumerated lists of things. I feel like this is like what we might want to have behind. And besides, I mean, you could just spend hours like chasing back and forth. You read one definition and it brings you to the end of the book to find another. And it's like you can go crazy. I feel like just reading, there's so much in there. So
So
probably
you'd
that would be my
literally read the
first.
dictionary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you put it like that, yeah, I guess so. But I mean, I do really feel like there's a lot of information in here too on like
Yeah.
astronomical principles. There's enough that you could, be casting a chart, and I mean, there's everything in here.
Yeah,
Um,
even
yeah.
what I always love to look at, because my last name starts with Z, is the very last word of the dictionary. And in
Oh,
this one, you have something I don't think is pointed out in many of them. Zugos is one of the
uh,
Greek names for the
hmm.
sign and constellation Libra used by Ptolemy. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Zugos. And I also noticed when I was looking through this, the bibliography itself is an entire curriculum.
It is, yeah, this bibliography is extremely, again, comprehensive, but also there are gems in here that you just don't hear about, that have also led me down some interesting rabbit holes. Because, yeah, I mean, this guy just had such a wealth of knowledge, and this book
Yeah,
is like vital, I'd say, to anyone who has the bug for
right.
learning about astrology. This book will keep your mind going for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a dictionary, it really does have to show you the lay of the land in so many ways.
Hmm.
But I also love the way that star lore and humanities are brought together with the more scientific ways. So
Yeah, I mean,
that
there's
is,
many different mythologies and cultural representations of astronomy and different mythologies that are all included in here.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's even like, magical sigils, names of angels, like it goes from literally A to Z and a half. Like
Yeah, to
I can't
Zazel.
rec
You know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, A to
Um,
Zazel. Okay, cool. And the other thing too is the font size. I don't know if anyone can see this in the video version of our conversation, but the font size here is minuscule. I mean, you could
yeah,
spend
it's
forever reading this.
right. It is pretty small, but again, it's like hey, maybe can I bring a magnifying glass? Like, can I have an item? Can
Yeah,
I,
you'll
like, if
probably
I
need
need
one to
to?
light fires too, like shine it on
Oh,
a
okay.
little
Well,
leaf, for example.
I won't set this one on
Not
fire.
not the
That
books
one.
on fire. No, fires to keep yourself warm in the middle of the mountains. Okay. So,
Yeah.
okay, so that's book
Well,
number one, the Arcana
yeah.
Dictionary of Astrology by Fred Gettings. What would your second
Yeah.
pick be?
So my second pick, I wanted to have like a really comprehensive text on astrological foundations, practice, and just in the tradition, personally, I am gonna give this to the astrology of Sahl ibn Bishr, who was, essentially an early piece of the medieval Islamic tradition of astrology, and did an amazing job synthesizing a lot of work from the kind of link that transferred Hellenistic authors to the medieval and Persian world, from Al-Andarzaghar and Mashallah, and just sort of got all of these amazing branches into, one really big tome, which, Ben Dykes has sort of edited and put together here. So there's sort of different segments of this text. He's got all of the introductory foundations. He's got the 50 aphorisms, which are like 50 things that every student should just learn up front, things about like benefics and malefics and things like that. And then, he just goes into nativities extensively here. So how you actually throw these things into the pot and see what happens when they're stirred around. And also even there's a really cool book on timing where he's explaining different aphorisms about, this thing makes things become longer in life, or this thing will make this thing happen quickly at first and then slow down. There's like all those different really nuances with timing, that there's a really cool book for that in here as well. So, but yeah, this is really probably one of the most comprehensive authors we have from the tradition, who I'd love to bring with me.
Awesome. Yeah. And also bring to awareness. I myself have not dug as deeply into Sahl as you have. So my next question would be, in this, I would say it's actually kind of fictional, because any diagnosis of a nativity is also already a prediction. But when we're talking about perhaps like character versus forecasting events, how would you rate the mix in Sahl between the diagnosis of character as we know it in modern astrology versus the Time Lord systems that we get from more traditional approaches?
Yeah, well, I guess I would definitely say that there is a strong emphasis, I'd say there always has been, on the uh, excavation of human character from the chart. And Saul definitely has a lot there, in terms of, I think there's like nowadays we, at least in this more modern perspective, we can simplify the psyche into these 7 different, or 10 maybe, planetary archetypes. But really, all those same things are sitting already in the chart through, the ascendant, different divisions of the ascendant. So things like the bound, the ascending bound, even, they hadn't emphasized amount of delineation on like the moon and Mercury as important significators for human behavior, which Saul talks about. And um, yeah, I guess there was also just an understanding that like um, the actions that one is drawn towards, has to say something about who you are and what you do. So obviously, if someone has well dignified planets in their second house, they're going to be successful at making an income and gaining assets in their life, probably. But that's also going to, say something about what kind of person they are, that they're driven towards. Either, well, maybe they have luck with it, right? That's maybe a part of it, and that's why it can be complex. But there's definitely lines that can connect, that I think are thrown into a lot of those aphorisms about like, well, he does this so you can be like this, it like they're sort of interrelated. And I think that was how they saw it back then. It wasn't like there's no character because there's no, description of Mars being like your strength and power. It's just that it was almost like the lines were just less blurred between who we are and what we do, I guess, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Show and not tell, for example, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Very cool, very cool. And I also noticed that if you read the preface to this, Ben Dykes has done an amazing job of contextualizing Saul in history, but also bringing forward a thesis, which I think we need to give it some airtime. So the Book of Aristotle may have actually been composed by Elandar Zagar, which I find to be a pretty bold claim stuck inside of this preface here. Because I remember working with the triplicity rulers of the houses. It's one of my favorite topics. And so in Bonatti, it's always, and Elandar Zagar says, and we don't actually have the original or an original text by him. It's kind of always come through translations. And so I think it's fascinating that Dr. Dykes has put it together to say that, Elandar Zagar might have actually been the one behind the composition of the Book of Aristotle.
Yeah, it's extremely likely. And going back, he gives a table of those passages that he's, making this really powerful inference from. And when you go back and look at them, we'll talk about Rhetorius a little bit later, but like those same passages there are the same sentences that Saul is quoting from Al-Enda Zargar. So we almost have no other explanation to make than Enda Zargar must have been that link from bringing Rhetorius to the Arabic speaking world. Because up until that point, Pingree had sort of put out this theory that it had come through mashallah, but there was some, I guess, just discrepancies or inconsistency. There wasn't really enough proof that was actually how it came through. But then, through Ben's analysis with just what was left of the Book of Aristotle and what came to Saul from Andarzagar, it seems pretty clear, at least to me, from those references that I've gone back and looked at, that that's probably what it is. So it's really awesome that Ben did kind of put that together.
Yeah, I really hope at some point, as we recover older texts, we can find more Elandar Zagar. in a way.
I
So
know.
this is
Yes.
very cool. The other thing that's neat about this book that I learned after you brought it to my attention was some of the special vocabulary. Can you speak to some of the terms that really get you excited that Sahl uses that aren't used by others in the same way?
Oh, I well, terms unique to Saul. Um, I mean, again, it's also like I can't say I'm an expert on the Arabic, so there are some like I guess uh there's an amount of leeway that's taken with what Ben does in terms of occasional times that the English might be rendered either distinctly from similar words in Arabic or from different Arabic words that are rendered similarly into the English. So there's, I'd say it's probably 95%, pretty similar to how Abu Mashar talks or to how Al-Kindi talks. It sounds like it's very, if that in that era of, astrological practice. But I guess, um, something that I was thinking about where there's sort of an emphasis on with planetary rulership when it comes to talking about planets having a certain, ownership of a certain area in the circle in the sky. And often this word is translated in a lot of these texts as a claim, like a claim of ownership. And I think it's an interesting distinction because it's sort of saying that whether we're talking about the claim over a whole sign, or 30 degrees of the sky, or even a claim, of a bound, which in some areas as small as 2 degrees, that it's rightly so that that planet has a claim to that region and it's responsible for managing it, which means that bound of Saturn at the end of Pisces, it's like 2 degrees. It's still his claim and he's responsible for being there and assisting anything that's sitting there as much as he is for the 60 degrees between Capricorn and Aquarius. And I think that that kind of terminology is nice in dissolving the boundary and kind of hierarchical way we can assess dignity in some cases where, in the medieval tradition too, it was tabulated. They calculated almutins and gave certain rankings for things. But I personally believe that, yeah, that claim of 2 degrees is just as powerful to evoke astrological symbolism in the right context and is as necessary to use um, as, it's talking about a whole sign. It's like those smaller subdivisions are so powerful and they're so rich. And I think that we should have a more equated vision of how their symbolism can come to life in any given moment in the right context, that they're not lesser, really.
Right, right. And also there seems to be, when you say claim or when Saul mentions claim or a share, it's like this concept of power distribution that's got an agency to it because Saturn's claiming
Yeah.
those 2 degrees. It's not like, you have that and then you're not claiming it. I mean, maybe he can't claim it if he's in Aries or, Leo, but this idea that there is something to be staked, like I have something to
Hmm.
say here. I'm on this committee. I'm in this little fiefdom,
Right.
inside of this nation state of 60 degrees, for example, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point because I think as more as just the use of more of the essential dignities is coming back into modern practice, there's so many ways that all of those, decans and bounds and triplicities, I think we're just going to continue to discover so many ways that their applications are coming alive when we look at them and pay attention to them and open them up to that realm of astrological interpretation. So yeah, I think it's really beautiful to think about how, even things smaller than bounds, right? Like the ninth parts or the 12th parts, which are these other even smaller kind of fractalized divisions of each sign. Um, as we start to use these more and revive them more, we'll see that like it doesn't matter. Like we shouldn't like compare an essential dignity. It's like each dignity system is its own whole perfect thing because it's a way to cut up the whole sky and organize information into one system by looking at it one way. And yeah, like we can kind of aggregate those essential dignities and get a feel for a larger scale picture of how the energy is kind of getting thrown around in the chart. But like when you just peek into the 12th parts, it's like that is so unequivocally powerful. It's like they can reveal so much information about what's sitting in a chart. And same thing with, whatever else you want to look at. It's like you just hone in on the one thing and you're going to find it rich with information. So I think it's great. Yeah.
Can we rewind just a second and describe what the 12 parts are for people who may not know, only because I feel like they're becoming popular now, and you might be actually one of the vectors for that with the poster that you created. But can you just go back into some nuts and bolts about what 12 parts are?
Yeah, definitely. So the 12th part, as it sounds, is essentially taking a macroscopic view into each sign as if each sign were its own zodiacal landscape within just 30 degrees. So we're slicing up each sign into 12 portions or 12 parts. And we're going to enumerate them beginning from the sign you're counting in. So, for instance, like that first sliver of Capricorn will be ruled by Capricorn, and then it will go to Aquarius, and then it will wrap all the way around so that the last few degrees of Capricorn are ruled by Sagittarius, and then it will jump into the next sign. So, it's really like the one of the most elegant harmonics to observe because it's really like the next logical step. Like we divide the sky into 12. Well,
Mhm.
we take each of those slivers and put it into 12 again. And I kind of talk about it like it's an astral projection of a planet. Like it's sort of when you kind of zoom in and microscope, view on this planet, like it has this kind of secret place where it's also putting its influence and putting its virtue and
Mm.
participating in that area of the chart. So Saturn and Mars are their 12 parts are going to fall into other places or other
Mhm.
houses in the chart. And especially if they fall into a close aspect by degree with another planet, it's like it opens up a whole other chart that's sitting
Mm.
inside of that natal harmonic, the first harmonic.
I also wonder, what would you say to someone in two cases? The case one would be a planet like Saturn in Cancer being in the part of Capricorn, right? So
Mhm.
it goes from being in debility to being in rulership, or vice versa, right? One where Saturn's in Capricorn, but it's in the 12th part of Cancer. How would you speak to that person or those two
Yeah,
people?
yeah, it's that's an amazing point because dignity is a whole other facet of how we can observe that change in a planet's, again, that individual journey. Um, Planets that are in the natal chart fallen or debilitated or in exile, when they move into a sign where they have a claim, where they have a domicile or an exaltation, that's actually going to boost the strength of that planet a lot, and it's going to deposit that strength into the house where that sign is sitting. So say for instance, you have Saturn in Cancer, in the fourth house, then that's maybe going to open up a conversation with someone about the problematic or challenging experiences they had in their home life with their family, or maybe with a powerful dominant male figure in their life. But should that Saturn be at 15 degrees of Cancer, where he moves halfway around the wheel, moves into the 10th house in his own sign, then there's this whole opportunity for how, maybe that motivation of whatever their childhood experiences were motivated them to become really successful in their professional career. And so those changes in dignities show a change in the timeline of how that manifests from the natal to the later position as it moves over time.
Got it. So it can be used in forecasting in your experience.
Yes,
Very
absolutely.
cool.
Forecasting, it can show life transitions again from those, if it starts in an exalted position and moves into a debility. Yeah, it can show how things can evolve into, again, a lesser influence in the
Mm.
context of where it's sitting.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's an awesome second text to bring with you to the Altai Mountains. So we have the Astrology of Sahl, from translated by Ben Dykes, and an Arcana Dictionary of Astrology by Fred Gettings. What would your third book be?
So my third book is going to be The Prima Mobile of Placido de Titis or Placidus. And yeah, I printed out a copy because I haven't got my hands on a nice edition yet, but I see you have a very nice print edition there
We
of
have this
Placidus.
Black book translated by John Cooper with an introduction by the famed mundane astrologer Michael Bygent.
Wow, very
Yeah,
nice. Yeah, I have the Cooper translation too.
yeah.
But yeah, this is like a very yeah, pretty old uh facsimile of the initial version. But anyway, yeah, I'm really fascinated with Placidus's work. And this text really here is all about, yeah, it's really about timing techniques and using and synthesizing different kinds of astrological time scales, to represent the evolution of our lives. And
Mm.
so he's pretty remarkably putting together, at least in this text, an exposition of how, well, first of all, just the power of primary directions. He goes extensively and really reframing and reworking the techniques and the technology of primary directions up to his point in history. He made some interesting innovations, made a new house system for them to work together. Although that's also kind of like a misnomer, really, that you need the house system to equate with the system of directions, but he did kind of reform or reframe both. But then, yeah, he's layering them with secondary And it's a form of, I guess, a tertiary progression. I think you can call it, I think there's like tertiary 1 and 2, but I think they're also called minor progressions. So it's not a true tertiary like day for a month, but it's like the minor progression month for a year that he's kind of layering in as a third element to how the things are spinning together, which is really
Wow.
cool.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And so this is the famed origin of the Placidus house system that's inimical to most astrological software as of now.
hmm
I have a
Yeah.
feeling there'll be other house systems at the basis of other software as we move forward, but
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, if any system were to have popularized itself into like a modern mainstream practice, like Placidus houses are really sleek. You know,
Mhm,
they're really, it's a time-based system. So it's
mhm.
incorporating a lot of dynamic movement in the celestial sphere that's really complicated mathematically.
Yeah.
So there's a precision to it that's really elegant. I don't use Placidus houses, but I still think they work great.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's a whole conversation.
I believe it
Uh,
was Wade Caves at the STA horary class who brought it to my attention that Placidus, and you can tell me if this is true because I haven't worked into the origins of his house system in that much detail, but that the house cusps can tell you what planetary hour it was.
yeah, they can. If you look at where the sun is sitting and what house it is
Yeah.
in a Placidus house division, yeah, you can essentially, the idea is that you can break, we have 12 houses, you break them all into two, we have 24 segments, and you can actually roughly count, how far it's moved from the ascendant, which would have been the new day when the new planetary hour, um, you know, sequence starts.
Right.
And you can estimate the planetary hour based off where the sun is in the Placidus houses. So yeah, it's a really cool little way that he's using that time-based system to show divisions of the day and divisions. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool. It's a cool system.
Well, that seems to be important also for horary to assess the radicality of the question, but it's neat that he
Mm,
can create a system that by sight you can figure that out without having to go to some kind of table or like, count on your fingers or anything like that. And then the other thing that is awesome about that is that planetary hours originated in Egypt, so that we have this lineage of, super ancient astrology that survived through Hellenistic Greece, landing into that Middle
mhm.
Ages, or actually at this point, wouldn't you say Placidus is more like Renaissance, early modern?
Yeah. Yeah, he's like 1500s, I think early 1600s, so it's definitely getting into yeah,
Yeah.
like middle 1000s, yeah,
Yeah,
Renaissance, early
right. Yeah,
Renaissance.
exactly. Cool. Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the planetary hours are really cool. I think that's a great point that it is bringing back a really ancient root of the tradition, especially because the Egyptians tracked so much the division of the sky and the hours throughout the day. So it's really cool that it retains that. And especially because the planetary hours are sort of like, they're sort of intangible. It's like we always can calculate the ascendant, we can look at it, but the hours run sort of like this, metadata in our computing system. It's like they're there and they work. And like I have my Time Nomad app where it's giving me an alert every hour, and like Mars hour starts and I see a woman starting to scream in front of me at the
Oh my
checkout
God.
line. It's like it's real, but it's like, we have these apps to show it now and it feels so physical because
Yeah.
they're easy to calculate now, but they're actually very, ephemeral. It's like
Right.
they're just fascinate me. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And also the way that they sort of like throughout the year, they kind of have this butterfly action
Yeah,
because
the
the day will be
fanning. I love
short and
it.
then long and then short. And so there's like a breath work there and this like,
Yeah.
if you think about the numbers, depending, I mean, I would say this is probably true for living in the north of North America, but the 45-minute hour versus the 75-minute hour by day
Right.
or night as you get closer to the solstice points.
Yeah, it warps our perception of time like an accordion. It's fascinating how that planetary hour shift changes over the course of the year. And
Yeah.
that's also what's so cool about the equinox, because it's like everyone's getting 12, or for 24 60-minute hours every
Mhm.
day, and just really cool. And I think
Very
also
cool.
like the work of Dr. Ali Alomi, he's been pushing out some really cool translations on his Patreon, um, translating works from different medieval astrologers. And yeah, the technique of the Lord of the Orb, which essentially is like most people now maybe are familiar with the idea of perfecting the ascendant,
Yes.
as like a Time Lord technique, but you can also do that from like the natal planetary hour. and they sort of had this concurrent, you look at the perfected sign and then the perfected hour, and they really work well in tandem together. So I think that's cool for the Placidus house system too. It's like got the ascendant, got the hour, and then you can kind of build out
Wow.
all the. So it makes sense though, right? It's like we have a sign-based
Yeah.
planetary sequence and a planet-based one, and I
Hmm.
don't know. I think they're
Yeah.
really cool.
Wow. Lord of the Orb. I think I need to change my job title.
Yeah, or Lord of the
Yeah.
Turn. He's kind of
Hmm.
popularizing that
Yeah.
terminology. He
Yeah.
doesn't like the orb so much, but I've always
Right.
called it the Lord of the. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I love
Uh,
how the terminology will shift and morph as we work through all of these things, especially as the various translation projects proceed over time. One
mm.
word that caught me from Sahl, actually, that I wanted to bring back is the word glow and
Oh
the
my goodness.
idea
Yeah.
of glow.
Yeah. It's again speaking to that really visual way that those changes in the appearance of the planets visibly by
Mhm.
their brightening or dimming or even being slightly colored, with the study of different fixed stars, right? It's like all those things have significant symbolism. And I think that idea of the glow really evokes that image of like, when planets are waxing, when Venus and Mercury are rising in the evening and the setting sky in the west, it's like they have this light. It's elegant to see that appearance, and you can see how they're comfortable. They're brighter,
Mhm.
they're glowing more. And
Yeah.
so it says something stronger about their power and what they're doing in that chart.
And
So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It would lead to a more nuanced interpretation of the quality of their expression, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're glowing.
Thank you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. Okay,
uh,
cool. Okay, so if you were going to suggest some books for beginners, because I feel like the books
mm,
that you've chosen to take with you, besides maybe the dictionary,
y-
are pretty high level, foundational, yes, but also not necessarily where you'd want to begin learning about astrology. So if you were going to be professor of astrology and give someone some assignments, where would you start them?
yeah. Well, the first one, if I can like sneak it in, it's really, again, it's foundational and I think everyone should read it. It's the Corpus Hermeticum. This is the foundation for the theological, philosophical, metaphysical underpinnings of the entire, Western Hermetic tradition, which includes astrology and alchemy and magic and all of these concurrent sciences that were gelling together in the zeitgeist of the ancient world. And I think having a really deep knowledge of, again, not just like what the metaphysical perspective was behind what this astrology was and why it works and what we're doing when we're casting charts, but really I think it also serves to remind people that it's like we can be so, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but like I think studying astrology really takes us up, from the
Mhm.
earth. And I
Yeah.
think the Corpus Hermeticum is so important because it reminds us why we're down here to bring that heaven down to earth. So I think it's just beautiful for, everyone to maybe just peek into what Hermes has to inspire all the students of the Hermetic lineage with those ideas about transcendence of our reality. But
Mhm.
anyway, I would universally recommend Astrology and the Authentic Self by Demetra George to anyone who's looking to get started with astrology because this is a really wonderful primer on, again, like it's that piece of, okay, you have to kind of get all the base ideas and the symbols, but she really takes the reader step by step in weaving them into making meaning in a chart. And I think it's a great gateway for people who maybe have some familiarity with modern astrology. It's great because it's going to reinforce all those things, but also offer some gateways into the traditional perspective. But it's still a universal place anyone I think can enter with this text. Um, and then should anyone want to go further, an author that I really do think is pretty exceptional and unique would be Rhetorius the Egyptian, who, sort of mysterious figure. But yeah, we have this compendium that was translated by James Holden, and it's pretty unique in the sense that he actually includes a lot of really powerful chapters on the synthesis, chart synthesis, and what it means to, he describes all these things, the part of fortune, the part of spirit, the prenatal, whatever. But he actually tells you, unlike most authors in the tradition, what it means to look at all those things in an order and pick apart what they mean and how they work together. And that's really valuable for anyone who's already learning traditional astrology to read why you have all these little pieces and what they mean when they work together. And I'd say that's why he is invaluable to students who want to really put together their knowledge of traditional or ancient methods of astrology.
Very good. Very cool. Yeah, it seems like, so if you were to cut your teeth on Rhetorius and then make your way to Sahl, what would that shift feel like in terms of expanding the horizon of astrology? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, with Rhetorius, again, it's like this is just sort of, the manuscripts and papers that have kind of been shuffled and compiled and brought together to give us like this book here that we have from the AFA. Like, thank you. But we don't really know exactly what that original manuscript entailed. So there are still some missing links, which Saul, if someone were to go from one to the other, Saul will blow out of the water with such complex detail. That is just so organized for a student to understand and read in order and see. It's like why we look at like what is sitting in a house, where is the ruler of the house, is there a lot, or a special point that we can look at to find more information about a specific topic. Saul just does everything in a really neat way, which became sort of standard around that time in the medieval period, to really talk about house by house. How do you tell someone about everything going on in their life? Saul blows that out of the water. All the roots are here. And as we said earlier on, Rhetorius, this guy was the link that brought that transmission of the Hellenistic corpus of texts into the medieval period. So this is crucial for that reason as well. There's sort of like a kind of symbiotic linkage that I felt like moving through that, because there are elements of Rhetorius that are definitely more distinctly medieval, that don't feel like Valens when you're reading Valens. And like talking about like Mercury and Venus and Mars as like significators of someone's like work and like what you're doing out in the world, and we have that in Rhetorius. Like there's lots of those evolutions that we see where he kind of bridges that gap. And so I feel like Rhetorius is a really powerful figure because he's kind of straddling both of those traditions and really gearing his information towards synthesis for students to grasp and put it all together. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Start at the root and branch out from there. Very cool. So if you wanted to have people find you, what are you working on right now, and where can people find out more about your work in astrology?
Yeah, so my handle, website, everything, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Omega Astrology, omegastrology.com. And yeah, right now I'm working on a presentation I'm going to be doing in Salem, Massachusetts next week, Saturday, May 6th. It's going to be on using triplicity in astrology. And yeah, I have to say that that realm of practice is one of the first things that I actually it was brought first to my attention from your work on triplicity and this, like we were talking about Alan Darzagar, those kind of early methods of using it for amazing nuance and talking about different house topics. But yeah, we'll be looking at Dorotheus's approach to using triplicity and understanding, periods of eminence and power in people's life, but also just like, looking at Venus. It's like, how does love kind of begin and culminate and change for people? So yeah, we'll look at a variety of different methods to, yeah, really get more nuance with the use of triplicity. If people are curious to learn more about that, they can go on my website and register for that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for taking time to tell me about your favorite astrology books, and I hope to have you back.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Jen. And thank you to everyone else who's listening. And please support Kaylee. Kaylee's absolutely going to just be taking off in the next few years. And I'm so excited to be able to be on the channel here and be on the podcast and help support it. So if people are curious, go become a member at Kaylee. I can't support enough all the awesome things that are happening there. So just wanted to shout that out too.
Thank you so much, Cam. That's awesome.
Of course.
Thank you. And yes, everybody,
Yeah.
come over and visit, and let's keep talking about these books and learn from them and get super excited. So awesome. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.